Welcome to Section 5, the Regulatory Framework. Every clinical trial operates inside a web of laws, guidelines, and authorizations. Before a single participant can be enrolled, before a single dose can be administered, a sponsor must navigate a regulatory system that spans continents and has been built up over decades in response to some of the darkest episodes in medical history. In this section, we will trace the regulatory framework from its ethical origins, the Nuremberg Code and the Declaration of Helsinki, through to the practical mechanics of getting a trial authorized today. We will cover the U.S. system centered on the FDA and the investigational new drug application, the European system transformed by the Clinical Trial Regulation of 2014, and the International Harmonization Framework established by ICH. We will also look at what happens when a regulator decides a trial must stop. By the end of this section, you will be able to navigate the global regulatory landscape and understand what drives every key compliance requirement in clinical research. Section 5 is built around 5 lessons. Lesson 5.1 traces the historical foundations, from the Nuremberg Code through the Declaration of Helsinki to the Belmont Report, and how these ethical principles became the ICH GCP guideline that governs clinical research today. Lesson 5.2 covers the U.S. regulatory framework, the FDA's structure, the key Code of Federal Regulations parts, and the mechanics of the IND application. Lesson 5.3 moves to Europe, examining the EMA and the clinical trial regulation that fundamentally changed how trials are authorized across EU member states. Lesson 5.4 surveys the ICH guideline families that harmonize standards globally. And Lesson 5.5 looks at the practical process of getting a trial authorized, comparing the IND and CTA pathways, and explaining what a clinical hold means for a sponsor. Lesson 5.1, Historical Foundations of Clinical Research Ethics. You cannot understand why today's regulatory framework looks the way it does without understanding what drove its creation. The rules we follow are not arbitrary bureaucracy. They are a direct response to specific historical failures. This lesson traces that history. The regulatory framework for clinical research rests on 3 foundational documents, each a response to the inadequacies of what came before. The Nuremberg Code, issued in 1947 by the judges of the Nuremberg military tribunals following the Nazi medical experiments, established 10 principles for ethical human experimentation. The very first principle states that the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This was radical at the time. The idea that no scientific interest, however compelling, could justify research on a person without their freely given, informed agreement. But the Nuremberg Code had limitations. It focused on non-therapeutic research and had no formal enforcement mechanism. The World Medical Association adopted the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964 to extend its reach. The declaration distinguished therapeutic from non-therapeutic research, introduced the concept of an independent ethics committee, and has been revised 9 times, most recently in 2013, to address issues like placebo controls, post-trial access, and mandatory registration of clinical trials. In the United States, the Belmont Report of 1979 translated these principles into a framework for federal policy. Its 3 principles, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice, became the philosophical foundation for 21 CFR Parts 50 and 56, the regulations that govern informed consent and IRBs in U.S. clinical trials today. The International Council for Harmonization Good Clinical Practice Guideline, ICH E6, is the document that converted the ethical principles of the Declaration of Helsinki into an operational standard for clinical trial conduct. It was first adopted in 1996 and significantly updated in 2016 with the R2 addendum. The definition on screen captures its scope. GCP is an international ethical and scientific quality standard covering the design, conduct, monitoring, recording, analysis, and reporting of clinical trials. It guarantees two things simultaneously: that trial data is credible and accurate, and that participants' rights, safety, and confidentiality are protected. 4 pillars underpin GCP. The first is ethical conduct. Participant welfare always takes priority. The second, added in R2, is risk proportionality. Sponsors are expected to implement oversight that is scaled to the complexity and risk of the specific trial. A small Phase 1 healthy volunteer study does not need the same oversight infrastructure as a global Phase 3 mortality trial. This principle, quality by design, represents a philosophical shift away from documentation for its own sake toward a more intelligent, risk-based approach. The third pillar is documented evidence. In GCP, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Every action, every decision, every data point must have an audit trail. The fourth is system-based oversight, a proactive quality management system that identifies and mitigates risks before they affect participants or data integrity.